Make way for Mr. Speaker.
I invite the member for Kamloops South Thompson to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
God of peace and love, you guide everything in wisdom and justice. In your goodness and with the spirit of counsel and fortitude, assist all of us elected to serve the people of British Columbia. May we always seek the ways of righteousness, justice, and mercy. Grant that we may be enabled to serve our province with honesty and integrity. Today we pray for all British Columbians impacted by the floods and other disasters that have hit so many so hard. We pray that everyone stays safe and that everyone finds the supports they need to recover. We pray for all first responders, road builders, emergency management personnel, and the countless volunteers who have stepped up to help their fellow citizens. We pray that you support all of us as we work together to rebuild this amazing province of British Columbia that we are all so privileged to call our home. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Introductions by members. Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. This may be more in the nature of a ministerial statement than an introduction, but there are some very special guests to me personally in the House here today. Claudia Soto and Lulu De Soto, members here will know. They may recognize them from the Puerto Vallarta Amigos food truck. And I know the member... I know that this is not a partisan issue. The member for Kamloops South Thompson and I share an affinity for the burritos from this particular food truck. Now, Lulu and Alan Zersato own the food truck. Alan while starting a business and working at the food truck, went to UVic, did his business admin degree, is now working at a local firm here in Victoria. Claudia, working full-time in the food truck, is also studying at UVic in the business administration program. Lulu, running the food truck throughout the pandemic. Just incredible stories about new arrivals in British Columbia from Mexico. Would the House please join me in making them feel very welcome and thank them for the amazing food that they provide.
Kelowna Mission.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. Well, loyal friends are incredibly precious. Loyal political friends are precious and rare. Rob Murphy is a brilliant communicator and political strategist working on all levels of government and campaigns, and brings around all his positive focus while enjoying a great beer, scotch, and cigar. While working with me might not have been his first choice, continuing on in this political journey has been. I'm so honored to have him in the House today. Would the House please join me in welcoming Rob Murphy?
Member for Columbia River Revelstoke.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the gallery, I've got a very special person up there. She's been my best friend for about 20 years. She's my confidant. She's my supporter in campaigns like none other. She's my most valued critic, and she's my mentor. She's also a duly elected Area F Director for the Regional District of East Kootenay, and also the Vice Chair of the Regional District of East Kootenay. So I would ask this House to make my wife Susan feel very warm and welcome.
Member of State for Infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce somebody very special to me in my office, my administrative assistant, Sonia Leo. Sonia was hired in the middle of the pandemic, which is a difficult time for anybody to get up to speed in a new job, but she did it. She works closely with my staff here and my staff in the constituency of North Vancouver-Lonsdale to coordinate my schedule and offer administrative support. And my constituency assistants tell me that she's professional, communicative, and they talk about how proactive she is as well. And that's good for me because, as everyone in this House knows, happy constituency assistants are very key to providing good service to our community. And Sonia does all of this while adapting to the unexpected challenges that life throws her as a working mother of 4 young children living in Duncan. She drives 2 hours each way to come here to work here at the Legislature, and has had to save her kids at the same time from boo-boos and sniffles at schools, even having once to save her kids from a pine cone to the eye. And despite all of this, she always makes sure that things are sorted for us here in the office, working flexibly from home and filling gaps to ensure that we keep on ticking. I'm so fortunate to have her working on my team, and this is her first time witnessing proceedings live here in the chambers. Would the House please join me in welcoming her to the gallery today?
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce Miriam McPhail to the House. Miriam is first and foremost a friend and a supporter, not only to myself, but to all of the South Island MLAs. But she's also a graphic designer extraordinaire who helps me look my best on social media and in print. I'm so delighted that Miriam is in the House today, and I ask that everybody join me in making her very welcome.
Member for Nechako Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there are many forest workers and families who would like to be down in the Legislature this week. But due to challenges, it's difficult for them to get here. But a few have made their way down today to witness the proceedings, and I'd like to introduce them here today. Rona Doucette, who represents WAS Rural BC Communities, is here in the gallery, along with Henry Mackelson from Campbell River, representing small businesses who rely on forestry, and Tamara Meggett, who is representing forest families throughout BC. These people have been tirelessly working in the forest sector, supporting their families, supporting their communities, and they're here to see the proceedings and to hear answers from the Minister. Would the House please make them welcome?
Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm so delighted to introduce Emma Jane Burian and Grace Sinetz, who are both in the gallery today. Emma Jane is doing a double major in political science, environmental studies at UVic. Most of her high school, she spent her time organizing climate justice events, and she received the 2020 Victoria Leadership Award for her work on flourishing and safe environments, something I think we can all recognize are essential in the times we're in. Grace is in grade 11 this year. She works part-time, and like Emma Jane, Grace spends a great deal of time organizing for climate justice. Grace has done a TED Talk on how young voices build a strong democracy. I recommend it for anybody to watch. This isn't their first visit to the legislature. It certainly won't be their last, and I hope one day soon to actually see them down in these seats rather than up in the gallery. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
There's an image making the rounds on social media featuring a background of fire and flood with the words in bold letters, BC strong through hell and high water. Powerful words, summing up what most of us would agree has been one of the most difficult years in our province's history. But let's not forget that for generations, this incredible province was built with grit and determination. A province that punched railroads through mountains. A province with some of the largest dams in the world. A province that knows how to build highways through dangerous high mountain passes. A province truly like none other. So big and beautiful, yet different from one region to another. With mountains, glaciers, oceans, desert, plains, and rich farmland, all stitched together with beauty and ruggedness, a respect for the massive power of Mother Nature and brave people. In the face of past daunting challenges, British Columbians have always met these challenges head-on as one province, and we've always come through together with courage and with hopes of better days ahead. And so here we are again, in the aftermath of yet another massive disaster, one that has severed countless highways, caused unimaginable flood damage, and sadly claimed lives. There is, of course, understandable concern about the province's critical transportation network, with movement from our coast and the interior severely limited. But, Mr. Speaker, here's the good news. Our province is home to many of the world's finest highway engineers and road builders, and they're unfazed by the task ahead. Let's remember that the Coquihalla Highway, much of which was built during harsh winter conditions, was considered one of the greatest engineering marvels of its time. With this in mind, we can and we will urgently rebuild these roads again quickly. We have traveled this road before. To everyone who has stepped up this past week, first responders, local officials, road builders, emergency management personnel, and the countless volunteers, thank you. To everyone who will pull out all the stops to help rebuild our great province, thank you as well. You have our gratitude, for you are proving once again that BC is indeed strong through hell and high water.
Member for North Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm excited to highlight a fantastic initiative that is taking place right now in Campbell River. I had the pleasure to visit the sorting site for a local Clean Coast, Clean Waters project. When I showed up at the New Wave Dock building, I was greeted by smiling faces of a group of young people decked out in heavy-duty rain gear, sorting through tons of debris that had been gathered through coastal shorelines in and around Campbell River and the Discovery Islands. These young people have been working on this project since September, scouring hundreds of kilometers of coastline, collecting and removing debris. Once a week, they head to the sorting site where they separate garbage into recyclable and non-recyclable materials, ropes, fishing nets, chains. But what most shocked me the most, Mr. Speaker, was the amount of styrofoam, from itty-bitty pieces to great big slabs. This project is the initiative of the Campbell River Association of Tour Operators. This group of local tour operators pivoted from their usual work when COVID-19 disrupted our tourism sector. They created employment opportunities for a bunch of committed youth, are cleaning up miles of our coastline, and have demonstrated a huge amount of resiliency, Mr. Speaker. During my visit, the tour operators launched their Grizzly Meter, a sign that has since been erected in downtown Campbell River that shows just how much garbage has been collected over what length of shoreline. At the time of my visit in early November, they had traversed 250 kilometers and had collected over 50,000 pounds of garbage. On any given day, in all kinds of weather, at least 12 young people, along with tour operators, are out there collecting sacks of debris and making a huge impact on cleaning up the coastline. I was so impressed by the dedication of this group, Mr. Speaker. They're enthusiastic to do the work. They are deeply invested in this project and passionate about the environment. It was inspirational, Mr. Speaker, and I hope this chamber will join me in expressing my deepest appreciation for the job that they are doing.
Member for Caribou North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm so proud to rise in the House today to discuss the important role that BC colleges play to the economic recovery in British Columbia. BC colleges are the heart of our post-secondary education system. They serve people in communities all across this province. They work closely with major employers, stakeholders, and government. They're on the ground in our communities, understanding the existing gaps in labor market needs. And if you are an employer that seeks some staffing, why not contact your local college to see if there's training and employees that you can access. One such program that I'm a strong advocate for is the dual credit program, which lets high school students take college trade courses while earning dual credits towards their high school graduation. The College of New Caledonia has been an influential supporter of students, and I'm so proud to work closely with CNC and to celebrate the work that they've accomplished in partnership with our school district to offer dual credit programs. Now, I've seen the success of this program firsthand, and I feel there is great value in expanding these types of programs across British Columbia. I feel that the dual credit program could be expanded into healthcare, care aids, early childhood education foundation courses, and could have a significant impact in each of our communities. I would like to congratulate Dr. Dennis Johnson on becoming the 8th president of the College of New Caledonia. Dr. Johnson brings more than 30 years' experience in the post-secondary sector, and we're very pleased to have him in the North. I would also like to recognize that Dr. Johnson yesterday was on his appointment yesterday as the board chair of BC Colleges. In Dr. Johnson's words, and I quote, "As we recover from COVID-19 pandemic and build new opportunities in a changed world, the province's colleges are focused on ensuring students can access the training and applied education they need for better lives and stronger communities." I know I join all members of this House in congratulating Dr. Johnson, thanking outboarding Chair Sherry Bell from Camosun College, and offering our support of all of our BC colleges, recognizing the critical role and impact they make in our communities.
Member for North Vancouver Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to talk about the unseen workforce that does a great service in keeping our health delivery system moving. Usually I talk about the nurses who are always there providing skilled care in both hospitals and homes. And we talk about our first responders as well, ambulance, fire and police, who attend to scenes and sort things out. Or we talk about those who keep our supply chain going, our farmers, our truckers in our grocery stores, or our volunteers, our service agencies, our churches who reach out to provide care and support in so many ways. And the list of people goes on, all of whom contribute towards managing and recovering from this thing we call COVID, amongst other things. Well, Mr. Speaker, today I would like to talk about a different group of people, also important, especially when you're in need of diagnostic services to ensure effective treatment. Those folks who take you into their specialized area with mystical equipment and position you in such a way that a clear X-ray image can be taken of any affected area. These are our medical radiographic technicians, and just like many other healthcare roles, we don't have enough of them, and we don't recognize their value and importance until we can't get an appointment, urgent or otherwise. Luckily, the Minister of Advanced Education and Skills Training and her staff have been busily at work ensuring that we now have more training seats opening up for these important people. The 2-year diploma program is available at BCIT, Camosun College, and the College of New Caledonia. Students are trained in areas of computed tomography, or CT in our language, fluoroscopy, OR imaging, emergency trauma, interventional procedures, and mammography. These programs include classroom learning, labs, and clinical placements throughout BC and are a viable career choice for anyone with an interest in providing essential healthcare support. Thank you to our MRTs for the specialized and important work that they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On November 6th, it was truly a run for the roses. The 25th anniversary gala for Sources Foundation was a truly special event. Over $300,000 was raised in support of mental health and wellness. For over 40 years, Sources has been a pillar in many communities across this province, and I know that all members of this House share stories of how Sources has impacted their constituents at their most vulnerable time. The foundation is built upon a vision and a dream, a desire to ensure that no one slips through the cracks and that support is available within our communities. Their dream is to provide a legacy to ensure that the help we provide today plants a seed that continues to grow in the future, to make a difference for this generation and each generation to come. Whether it's a senior experiencing social isolation, an individual or family who is struggling to complete their income tax return, or a mom trying to access support in order to flee domestic violence, Sources is there. I want to congratulate Sources CEO David Young and Sources Foundation President Bruce Hain and the countless volunteers, sponsors, donors, board members that continue to make this event, this foundation, this organization a success year after year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Vancouver-Kensington.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As we grapple with the impacts of climate change and many in British Columbia continue to struggle and brace with the devastation it has wrought, I recall the life of Chico Mendez. Chico Mendez was an inspirational leader whose courage created systemic changes in the Amazon rainforest and around the world. He was a Brazilian rubber tapper who was able to organize and move the government into setting aside large tracts of the rainforest as reserves to protect it from destruction. He was killed by a rancher's son in 1988, and he would have been 77 this December 15th. He was one of 18 children who only learned to read and write when he was 18 years old because he was determined to learn more about why his and other families were kept poor and exploited. Through newspaper articles that spoke about social and political issues, he came to understand issues around unionization and human rights and learned lessons that helped shape his understanding of the struggles before his people. Through his dedication and commitment to what is just, he was able to organize his fellow rubber tappers and others into fighting back against the destructive uses of the rainforest. They formed the Rural Workers Union in their area and later expanded to other regions. They united with other unions and organizations. And in 1977, at the age of 33 years old, he was elected as city councillor. He used his position to organize popular debates, peaceful protests, and political participation. He was called a threat to national security, arrested and tortured. But he persevered, and a few years later, he helped create the National Council of Rubber Tappers, and together with others, they discussed national problems of deforestation and exploitation. He was able to unite previously opposed groups like his fellow rubber tappers, Amazonian Indians, and international environmental activists under common goals. Chico Mendez lived a remarkable life and left us with a lasting legacy and lessons that surely serve as well to this day. Importantly, he also recognized that protecting the workers and the environment was more than just about that. I end with a quote from him. "At first, I thought I was fighting to save rubber trees. Then I thought I was fighting to save the Amazon rainforest. Now I realize I'm fighting for humanity." Thank you.
Members, before we start the question period, I have a special statement to make. Honourable members, when this House reconvenes in the new year, one of our esteemed table officers, Susan Surreal, will no longer be at the table as she will be embarking on her retirement. Susan began her parliamentary career at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, where she primarily supported the work of parliamentary committees, 11 in total over the course of 22 years of service to that institution. In 2011, Susan joined the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, first in Committee Research Services, then as committee clerk, and then in her current role of clerk assistant, committees and interparliamentary relations. In the fall of 2011, we briefly loaned Susan to the Yukon Legislative Assembly to serve as the institution's acting deputy clerk. In a decade of service to our Legislative Assembly, Susan has supported the work of 17 committees, including select standing committees, special committees, and the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, assisting these committees fulfill their terms of reference from this House. Susan's name is attached to over 20 committee reports. Susan has also served as a table officer, supporting hundreds of hours of proceedings of this House, committees of the whole, and the committees of supply. She was also an assistant editor of the 5th edition of Parliamentary Practice in British Columbia, published in 2020. Many members of this House, past and present, have relied on Susan's steady hand, her knowledge, and her expertise as they navigated their work on parliamentary committees and as they navigated the procedures and practices of this House. Her dedication and service to the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia have been most valued and appreciated, and I can say with certainty that they have made our institution better. It is my hope that in her next chapter, Susan will enjoy the simple things that bring her joy: biking, kayaking, being outdoors, and reading. Susan, on behalf of all members, I congratulate you on a remarkable career, one of steadfast servitude that has demonstrated exceptional dedication and integrity, and one that has brought great honor to your profession. We wish you the very best in your retirement. Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day, British Columbians are waking up in our province and finding it harder to get by under this government. Despite 2 straight election promises with big promises about affordability, life has never been more expensive than under the NDP. But this government has no plan to put people's worries at ease. And many families are actually asking themselves how they will continue to be able to afford to live in our province. We have seen 4 straight months of high inflation, and that's because things like housing and gas and food are getting more expensive day after day after day. And with the latest climate disaster in our province, we're already seeing the price of everything increase because our supply chains have taken a significant and devastating blow. So will the minister tell British Columbians exactly what this government is going to do to ensure that they can take care of their families? Tell them how they're going to be able to continue to afford to pay for increasing gas and food and housing. British Columbians deserve that. This government promised it and have simply failed to deliver. So where's the plan?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I can agree with the member that things have gotten more difficult since COVID for sure. They certainly have. But I also want to remind the member, and I want to remind everyone in this House, and I want to remind British Columbians that when they sat over here, they gave tax breaks to the wealthiest 2% and made everyone else pay for it. And I want to remind everybody what that meant for ordinary British Columbians. What that meant was that their MSP health premiums doubled. So what did we do? We eliminated them. Hundreds of dollars in people's pockets. Mr. Speaker, ICBC car insurance, when they were on this side of the House, went up 30%. And what do we have now? We actually have ICBC has a surplus, Mr. Speaker. And not only that, it was able to give rebates, checks, not one, but two. Mr. Speaker, we've also introduced the Child Opportunity Benefit. That provides up to $2,600 for families with 2 kids. That's making a difference and putting money into people's pockets.
Yeah. Leader of the Official Opposition, supplemental.
Well, thanks very much. You know, the minister can stand up and all her colleagues can clap. But there are families today in British Columbia who want an answer from this minister and this government about exactly how they're going to pay for their groceries tomorrow morning. That is on this government's shoulders. This is a 2-term government that made big, glossy promises, big brochures about how life was going to get better. And they have simply failed to deliver. British Columbians are struggling, and that answer just doesn't cut it. Minister can try taking a victory lap all she wants, but let's look at some of the numbers that British Columbians are facing. Does the minister know that since the pandemic started, the cost of getting chicken at the grocery store has gone up by 17%, and for beef, it's 20%. Housing prices are at an all-time high. And in fact, the elusive dream of owning a home is disappearing. It takes 34 years in British Columbia to save for a down payment on a house if you live in Vancouver. And there has been no action whatsoever on tackling gas prices, despite getting promises 3 times from the Premier. Our supply chains have been so drastically impacted by the latest disaster that the Royal Bank of Canada said things are going to continue to get worse. British Columbians deserve a better answer than that. And what they deserve is a plan. They deserve support and help, and this government to keep the promises it made during 2 election campaigns. So to the minister again, maybe this time she can look British Columbians in the eye and tell them how they're going to pay for their groceries tomorrow.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, well, thank you very, very much. And I want to thank the member for the question, because I really think it's absolutely fascinating to hear from this member their newfound interest in the struggles of ordinary people. Mr. Speaker. They made life so hard. They made life so hard, Mr. Speaker. They had a server wage in restaurants, Mr. Speaker. We got rid of that.
Members.
We increased the minimum wage.
The member had already asked the question.
Wages are up 21% since we formed government. Mr. Speaker, we made transit free for children. And that made a difference to families, Mr. Speaker. You know what else we did? We took tolls off bridges. What I want to say is, thank goodness it's us on this side of the House and not the people over there.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Not only has this government broken its promise on affordability, but they're also breaking the Premier's promise to not download costs onto small businesses, especially those that can least afford it. Now, we're still in the pandemic, but in 39 days, the NDP are cutting sick leave funding for workers and businesses, and they're putting the entire cost on businesses that are, again, hanging by a thread. Yesterday, in the Q2 report, the government confirmed that $310 million budgeted for sick leave will be unspent and returned to general revenue. So my question to the Minister of Labour is this: instead of letting this $310 million sick pay funding expire in 39 days, will the Labour Minister today commit to extending government-paid sick leave so that it doesn't expire at the end of the year?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think the fact that in my Q2 report yesterday, what we saw around the sick pay was the fact that British Columbians recognize that you take sick time only when you need it. And we prepared, as part of our pandemic contingencies, to make sure that we had resources available to support British Columbians as we go through COVID, making sure that we had the resources to make sure that there was support so that workers didn't have to go to work sick. And I think everyone in this House agrees how important that is. But what we saw, Mr. Speaker, was that British Columbians recognize that you only take sick time when you need it. And I think we can all be comforted by the fact that workers know what they need to do in order to keep themselves and to keep their colleagues and to keep their customers safe.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we agree that workers shouldn't have to go to work if they're sick. That's why we supported the sick leave plan. But we're also going to ensure that the Premier and that this government are held accountable for the commitments that were made to ensuring that the costs of sick leave were not going to be thrown entirely onto the shoulders of small businesses in this province. Again, in only 39 days, employer-paid sick leave comes into effect, and workers and employees still have absolutely no idea what will be implemented. The Premier's specific commitment around this was crystal clear. He said, and I quote, "We're looking at how we can implement sick pay in a seamless way without putting more burden on business at a time when business can least afford it." End quote. Mr. Speaker, government should do what we've been doing through this session. There's been an extension of a variety of COVID measures. The government should be taking the opportunity immediately to eliminate all uncertainty and concern and anxiety out there with small businesses and workers, and they should roll over this program. They should roll over the $310 million available and continue the current government-funded program until businesses in this province are fully recovered. So again, very simple question, looking for a straightforward answer from the Labour Minister. Will the Labour Minister extend the $310 million for government-paid sick leave that, if it isn't extended, is going to expire in only 39 days?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank the member for his question. Mr. Speaker, among many lessons that we learned during the pandemic, one was that the workers were forced to go to work when they were sick. They brought virus to workplace, and that virus spread among the workers. And in many cases, businesses had to be shut down. In Fraser Health alone, in April and May, 2 months, over 180 businesses were shut down, some of them more than once. And Mr. Speaker, those workers at workplaces, when they became sick, they went home to live with their families and their communities. Mr. Speaker.
Members, question was asked. Let's listen to the answer. It's okay. Let's listen to the answer. Wait for him till he finishes.
Mr. Speaker, it doesn't surprise me that sometimes when even looks like something that is a benefit to the workers, they light their hair on fire, Mr. Speaker. Well, let me tell you this. Mr. Speaker, there is an economic cost of her not having paid sick leave in place, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the seniors advocate, in her report last 2-3 weeks ago, I urge all of you to read that. Mr. Speaker, she said that the workers, because they didn't have paid sick leave, they came to work sick, and then they, Mr. Speaker, spread that to the patients and to the workers. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, many deaths. So there's a human cost, there's the economic cost, Mr. Speaker, for not having paid sick days. Mr. Speaker, we're going to do the right thing. We listened. We have consulted widely, Mr. Speaker. 60,000 surveys came back. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Both workers and businesses are worried, they're concerned that people went to work sick. Mr. Speaker, we're going to make it right so the workers don't have to choose to go to work sick or stay home and lose money.
Thank you. Can we get to the next person? Leader of third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Coastal GasLink has been found to have violated multiple environmental requirements over the past year and a half. Over the course of constructing their natural gas pipeline in Wet'suwet'en territory, CGL's failures to comply with environmental requirements have resulted in damaged habitat, eroded waterways, and the contamination of watersheds and pollutants. Inspections in late 2020 by the Environmental Assessment Office found that coastal GasLink activities are harming watersheds. In early 2021, independent erosion and sediment control auditors found that CGL was violating 8 out of 9 requirements. Coastal GasLink have failed to reclaim and restore the waterways that they have polluted. The company's infractions have impacted Indigenous rights as well. In July, Coastal GasLink was issued a warning after wrongly blocking a Wet'suwet'en woman from attempting to monitor pipeline construction in her territory. My question, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. On the one hand, the RCMP have eagerly enforced an injunction on behalf of CGL and this government's fossil fuel expanding agenda. And at the same time, there have been multiple instances of environmental violations on the CGL pipeline since construction began, with little or no enforcement. What will the minister do to ensure timely enforcement of these environmental violations?
Minister of Environment and Climate Strategy.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Coastal GasLink, as part of its environmental assessment certificate, has to abide by a number of conditions, has to continue to abide by those conditions. Staff and inspectors that are part of the Environmental Assessment Office have regularly conducted inspections. They have issued orders. They have issued directions. When they found those directions were not being complied with, they upped the level of inspection, and they have issued more orders and are now going through the process of considering the application of administrative penalties to make the point. We take the conditions on the certificate seriously. I continue to be briefed by staff, but I don't take over the role of staff in ensuring that an orderly application of orders and ultimately penalties if required are administered.
Leader of the Third Party, supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Administrative penalties, but no police raids yet, I understand. It's clear that this company has been harming the environment, and this government has abdicated its responsibility to the public interest. This abdication extends to basic charter rights, too. Last week, 2 journalists were illegally arrested when reporting in Wet'suwet'en territory. They were jailed for the entire weekend and only released yesterday. We're now learning that the RCMP had been tracking these specific journalists, which makes it very hard to understand how the police were saying, we didn't know that they were journalists when we arrested them. Yesterday, more than 40 news outlets and journalists signed a letter directed to the Minister of Public Safety of this House, calling on him to uphold the rule of law and ensure that police actions are not infringing on press freedom. This isn't the first time this government has restricted press freedom. The summer enforcement of media exclusion zones at Ferry Creek was found to be unlawful. And I think all of us, no matter where we stand on these issues, should be deeply concerned. Because the role of the media and press freedom in democracy is essential, and we don't want to have these continuing stories where we are looking very much not like a democratic country in the way the press are being treated here. My question for you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Public Safety and the Solicitor General and Deputy Premier. He has said that press freedom is important, and yet what we have seen in this province this year tells a very different story. What will he do to ensure that the charter-protected freedom of the press, recently reiterated by Justice Thompson in a BC Supreme Court decision, is upheld in this province?
Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And I have to take issue with a couple of points. The first being, government has not infringed on freedom of the press. Freedom of the press is a fundamental foundation of our democratic system in this province and in this country, and continues to be so, and we take that very seriously. The second point that I would also make is that when it comes to the enforcement of a court-ordered injunction, that is done by the police. It is not directed by myself as Solicitor General, and as I have said before in this House, nor should it be. What I can also tell the member, that when it came to the issue of the journalists, that went in the appropriate place in terms of the court, who issued a decision around bail and the undertaking, which the journalists agreed to do, and they were subsequently released. So in other words, the judicial process worked appropriately, and that's as it should be, not being directed by politicians.
Member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So weeks ago, the Premier said businesses impacted by the Northern Circuit Breaker, quote, still have opportunities to access provincial programs, end quote. But here's the problem. There are no programs right now. There's nothing for them. They all closed. Once again from this government, false hope for people and businesses that are struggling. And the regional health restrictions, the circuit breaker that's been announced, has now been extended indefinitely. That means no hope for many. The Premier said that this Minister of Jobs would be, quoting, quote, observing the activities in the region, end quote. What does that mean? We need people to not be observing. We need this minister to be doing his job. We need this minister to be supporting businesses who need help now. So a very simple question to the minister. Will the Minister of Jobs commit today to new circuit breaker programs for northern businesses that are struggling?
Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and certainly it's been highlighted that there are some businesses that throughout the province that are still struggling throughout the pandemic. The members know, because we canvassed this yesterday as well, part of another debate, that the measures that have been put in place in Northern Health are similar to ones that were put into some of the Fraser Valley as well. And the major restriction that's been put in place right now is that liquor can't be served past 10 o'clock. Restaurants can continue to function. Restaurants can continue to have people visiting them. Restaurants can continue to serve food past 10 o'clock, but they cannot serve alcohol past 10. And so we appreciate that has some impacts, but we've also offsetted that impact by reducing liquor pricing for businesses by 20%. So they're making more money on liquor sales now than they have ever made. They've been advocating for that for 10 years, Honourable Speaker. Members on the other side will know because they knocked on their doors several times asking for that. And so we have lowered their costs, but we know because of the pandemic and the high case counts and the loss of life that measures were needed to be put in place, and that's why they are moderate measures. And certainly our hope is that, that the vaccination rates continue to rise, that cases continue to fall, so that we can relieve those moderate measures so that people can return to a normal which they're comfortable with.
Member for Peace River South supplemental.
Thank you. So I'm trying to figure out why this minister wants to treat different parts of the province differently. Last time there was a circuit breaker announced, we made sure unanimously in this House, we all got together to make sure there were programs and supports for struggling employers and families. It was very easy to do. It was easy to do then. Now we've announced another circuit breaker that is hurting families and employers, and this minister is sitting on his hands. He's doing nothing to help them. Even yesterday in this House, he quoted, "This is certainly not a circuit breaker." end quote. It's almost like he's trying to play a word game to avoid helping people, because exactly what Dr. Henry said when she announced these restrictions, and I quote, "It's a circuit breaker." So is Dr. Henry right? Is it a circuit breaker? Is the minister right? This is not a circuit breaker? It doesn't matter. The employers and the families are hurting and need help now. Even arts groups up in the region right now are seeing the curtain drop, and they're losing another part of a busy time of year for them where they could be operating. To make it worse, the government has said now there's no end date for this circuit breaker. No hope for these people. The government has an opportunity. This Minister of Jobs has an opportunity today to give hope to these struggling people. Will he commit to stop just observing and actually do his job, introduce a circuit breaker program, and help these struggling families and businesses?
Minister of Jobs.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I'd remind the member that we have provided the highest per capita supports for people and businesses in the entire country. And in fact, Honourable Speaker,
Can we move on with the answer now? Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'll say it again. We have provided the highest per capita support for people and business in the country. In fact, the recent budget had additional supports. By the way, the members didn't support it, didn't support the additional measures that we put in place, which was a shame, Honourable Speaker. And the member also is not clear. When he refers to the circuit breaker, which we put significant dollars on the table, was when businesses were...
Members.
It was at a time when businesses were shut down, Honourable Speaker. Businesses couldn't serve patrons inside their establishment. They had only takeout. They couldn't serve any alcohol. We had complete shutdowns, and that's when the historic amount of dollars, the $528 million that we supported, $22 million in grants directly going into the pockets of businesses in their communities, Honourable Speaker. And so to compare the circuit breaker...
Members.
Honourable Speaker, the Leader of Official Opposition loves to heckle, and this is an important question, and I'd like to provide the answer.
You're obviously not going to give a circuit breaker, so what's the point?
Members, it's important that we listen to the Minister now. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As I already have highlighted, I'll say it again, the measures that we've put in place, the measures that the Provincial Health Office has put in place are very moderate measures to ensure that case counts come down. The core point of what's being done is to save lives, Honourable Speaker. Businesses... The Leader of the Official Opposition is correct. We have supported them the entire way. Brought in a budget this year, the opposition wasn't with us. They didn't support the additional measures for communities. They did not vote in favor of that, Honourable Speaker. We continue to support businesses. Businesses can continue to operate, Honourable Speaker. They can serve food. They just can't serve alcohol past 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Member for Nechako Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the gallery today are hardworking men and women of the forest sector, and they represent tens of thousands of workers across this province. Amanda Shortreed, who co-owns West Pro Logging, writes that the minister's deferral announcement has had immediate consequences. And I quote, "Much to our shock and dismay, we found out that 1.5 weeks ago that much of our winter plan has now been deleted," end quote. I've received hundreds of emails from across the province, as I know the minister has as well, of similar stories. The government has already admitted that because of their policies, thousands of workers are going to be out of work. Can the minister tell the people in the gallery if they will be one of them?
Minister of Forests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question, and I also want to welcome the families to the gallery here today, and I understand their concerns. I do understand their concerns because I also went through the concerns of the forest industry back under the member's government when 30,000 people lost their jobs in the forest industry.
Members.
And under our watch, we are ensuring there will be supports in place.
Order, please. Order. Minister, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do have a vision for forests in this province, and our vision ensures that workers and communities benefit from secure, innovative forestry jobs for generations to come. I want to make sure that we have a forest industry that is sustainable, resilient, and that our kids and grandkids can not only work in today if they so choose, but they can work in it for generations to come. And we have to make changes in the forest industry, but we will be there to support families who are in forestry-dependent communities.
Member from the Chaco Lake, supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And according to Stats Canada, more than 10,000 or about 10,000 forestry job gains between 2009 and 2017, and they've all disappeared now under this government. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that answer that the minister just gave is cold comfort to the good, hard-working folks that are in the gallery here today.
Let's listen to the question, please.
There are 13 families that rely on West Pro logging. And as Amanda says, and I quote, "The way in which this has been handled and implemented has been irresponsible, hasty, and quite frankly, shady. I don't trust that you will be there to help anyone. I'm sad, I'm scared, I'm worried for my family and for the families that rely on us." End quote. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I doubt there's very many people on that side of the House that have ever signed the front side of a paycheck. I have. And I can tell you that the stress that you go under in trying to make sure that you can provide for your workers and make sure that they have a job is enormous.
Members, please.
So can the minister tell these families why she is so determined to put them out of work?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really want to acknowledge the workers in the gallery, but I also want to say that I'm really quite concerned about the misinformation that is being spread by this member.
Members, order.
Unlike the other side of the House here, we will be supporting members. We will be supporting workers. We will be supporting communities that will be impacted by these potential deferrals that have not been made yet. We will have a set of comprehensive suite of supports for people, including connecting workers with other employment opportunities, providing education and training opportunities.
Members will be quiet now.
Yes, funding those people that are interested in bridging to retirement, which was widely oversubscribed.
Order. Minister. Members, let's show some respect to the family, please, and the workers. Listen to the answer. Yes. Calm down. Calm down. Take a deep breath. It's not the end of the world. Let's listen to the answer. Sure enough, member. Minister will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we know that there is interest in bridging to retirement because it was well subscribed in 2019 when we did the same program, when there was a turn in the industry. But we are also supporting new infrastructure projects and innovation in rural communities, so there are opportunities for employment. We are going to work in collaboration with local communities, with workers, with contractors, and with industry to ensure we get this right, because this is critical for jobs today, but also for jobs in the future.
The bell ends the question period. Attorney General. No, sorry, House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's my pleasure, Honourable Speaker, to table the annual report of the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch.
Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call committee stage on Bill 30, Attorney General Statutes Amendment Act. And in the Section A, the Douglas Fir Room, I call continued committee of the whole on Bill 23, Forest Statutes Amendment Act.
Committee chairs.
All right, members, I'd like to call a committee into session here for Bill 30, Attorney General Statutes Amendment Act 2021. Did the attorney want to make an open statement? Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm joined here by Elena Van Leeuwen, Policy Analyst with Ministry of Attorney General. Thanks very much.
Thank you. On Clause 1, Member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. I'm probably going to deal with Clauses 1 and 2 together. I won't be particularly just a short group of questions. If the Minister can offer his rationale for the selection of the new date, new date December 31, 2022.
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the reason for the date is twofold. One is it gives us enough time in terms of not having to come back to the House. If we were going to be coming back in the spring, the way that our legislative drafting process works, we'd be working on that right now. So it's logistical on one hand. On the other, it's based on expert advice that we received. I'm advised staff consulted with the Deputy Provincial Health Officer, Brian Emerson, as well as Emergency Management BC, and they advised that this was an appropriate date, and I'll note that there is the ability to terminate the Act sooner by regulation if things are looking more positive.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair, and I'm not going to ask the attorney for a full-on public health briefing, but can he offer anything, expand just a little bit on the advice with respect to the second part of his answer in terms of the information he received about the appropriateness of that 12-month extension, noting, for example, that we have dealt with another piece of legislation that spoke, I think, of an roughly 18-month extension for these purposes. The government has opted for 12.
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So obviously, I think we all hoped when we set the last date that we would be in a much better position by December 31st, 2021, in terms of the impact of various public health measures. And I note that many parts of the province are experiencing that, but some aren't. And so this is not advised that there wasn't some incredibly detailed epidemiological process that led to this date. But rather a date that was set based on the advice of these officials in terms of what they thought was realistic in terms of timelines around what we faced, to be hoping for the best, that we could pull it by regulation sooner, but prepared for a longer period of time than we might need this. I note the member raised the issue of the COVID access zones legislation, which we canvassed together recently. And the 18-month period compared to the 12-month period, that bill having the same feature of being able to be withdrawn by regulation if things are looking better, but the 18-month period taking us to the end of a school year, which we thought would be more understandable and predictable for folks and easier for administrators.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. And let's just deal with and confirm once and for all on the record something that the attorney has said. There is a regulatory to repeal this act in advance of the new date, December 31, 2022. There is no similar power, regulatory power, to extend the application of the act. That would require a reintroduction of legislation in the chamber. Is that correct?
Attorney.
That's correct, Honourable Chair. Given the authorities that are within the Act, we believe as a matter of policy it appropriate that any extension that would be required should necessarily come back to the House for the approval of the Legislature, rather than be extended by regulation or some other process.
Member.
And the Honourable Chair, to the attorney, the effect of passage of this provision is to extend the life of the Act, but more particularly extend the life of orders that have been issued pursuant to the provisions of the Act. Is the attorney in a position to indicate on the record the number of orders that remain in effect?
Attorney.
Currently, there are 13 orders and 2 regulations in effect. Anyone who's interested, the information is publicly available on the BC Laws website.
Member.
And my understanding is that there is a slight difference between the regulations and the ministerial orders insofar as the orders are set to expire at the end of this calendar year, whereas and would do so without without passage of the provision we're dealing with now, whereas the regulations, sorry, I should correct that, would expire and require being reissued, as opposed to the regulations, which would continue into effect and remain in effect following passage of this provision. Have I got that right?
Minister.
The short answer, and I don't see why I would stick with the short answer, is yes, when there's an opportunity to give a longer answer. There are 2 scenarios, one in which this legislation doesn't pass and the bill in front of the House doesn't pass, and so the date isn't extended and December 31st comes and the bill sunsets. And in that case, everything, both the orders and the regulations, all sunset. If this bill does pass and the date is extended by a year to December 31st, 2022, the regulations continue. They're essentially refreshed and no further action is required to be taken for the regulations. However, all of the orders do have expiry dates already built into them, so they would need to be revisited by Cabinet and reestablished in Order in Council. The member is correct, but a bit of detail there about the distinction between the regulations and the orders.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. And in the case of the orders that include within them expiry dates, am I correct, though, that notwithstanding the inclusion of expiry dates within the orders, if the COVID-19 related Measures Act were to be repealed in advance of that expiry date, the orders would repeal with it?
Minister.
Yes, that's correct.
Member.
And the two regulations that remain in effect pursuant to the COVID-19 related Measures Act, I'm advised that they are listed as numbers 31 and 32, the COVID-19 South Coast British Columbia Transportation Authority Act regulation, and 32, the COVID-19 Provincial Court Proceedings number 2 regulation. Those are the only 2 regulations that remain in effect. Is that correct?
Attorney.
Yes, that is correct.
Shall clause 1 and 2 pass? So ordered. And clause 3, member for Abbotsford West.
All right, so here's the, we come to this fascinating little discussion we might have. I suppose I should ask with respect to clause 3. I've indicated that I'm supportive, not offended in any way by the proposal to extend the time period for the independent committee, compensation committee, to do its work. But it's probably appropriate to ask the attorney to put on the record the government's and his rationale for making that change.
Attorney.
Honourable Speaker, with appreciation to Elena, we do have 3 other staff for this. If we could have a brief break to bring those staff in that worked on this section of the bill.
Thank you, Attorney. The House will be in recess until we have the appropriate parties in position. Thank you. Members, I'll draw this committee back to order. Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So there are a couple of sets of rationale for the extension of the timing before JCC is appointed. First of all, we would be following other jurisdictions, Alberta, Ontario, and the federal government. They all have 4-year commission cycles. So there is some good precedent for this. Without a doubt, having this every 3 years instead of every 4, there's a lot of staff time as well as judicial time that goes into these commissions. So it does have the effect of conserving resources and ensuring efficiency. There's also the reality that often these matters do end up in court. And to go through the process often all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, it requires a certain amount of time. So it avoids the situation that we found ourselves in British Columbia, where we still don't quite know what the outcome is of the 2016 Judicial Compensation Commission. And so a number of things flow from that, making it difficult to calculate what judges' salaries actually are for purposes of budgeting and so on. So there are a number of good reasons for this proposal.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. I made a fairly cynical remark during second reading about litigation, and the attorney has just referred to ongoing litigation out of the 2016 process. Is that the only one that's still the only version of this? And I'm getting a very quick indication that it is not, but I'm curious to know how many of these reports and recommendations are still being litigated.
Attorney.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So we were recently in the BC Court of Appeal on the 2016 matter, and the BC Court of Appeal allowed government's appeal in July. Currently the Provincial Court Judges Association has filed an application seeking leave to appeal to the Supreme Court on that matter. We have filed a response opposing leave. In addition, with respect to the 2019 Judicial Compensation Commission, the Provincial Court Judges Association has also filed for a judicial review of government's response, and that was filed in BC Supreme Court.
Shall Clause 3 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 4 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 5 pass? Member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. So we began a bit of an exchange, and I noted and was appreciative of the attorney's remarks in winding up the second reading debate in the House. And in posing the question, I'll restate my observation and recognize that what is being proposed here is not a huge change, but it does, in one limited circumstance, establish a mechanism whereby it's not the Assembly setting the remuneration for the independent judiciary. It does then become the executive branch, and I'm going to ask the attorney to offer his thoughts on whether he sees that in any way problematic. I had heard him talk about at one point, in either response to me or the third party, about the expedited process, and I'm not sure I quite understood that, because in the existing process, if all of the recommendations are accepted, that the report is on the floor of the House, nothing gets done. I think it's a 2-week. I think it's 2 weeks, but maybe staff can confirm that, and it just automatically takes effect. But it does flow via the legislative branch of government. And the attorney, in fairness, asked or indicated that he might be prepared to consider suggestions for an amendment. I thought about that, and I appreciate it. I'm not sure there's a way for me to suggest tinkering with what is Clause 5 in this particular act. I just couldn't think of a way to do that wouldn't cause all kinds of short of not supporting the section, I suppose, which would leave the short of voting the section down, which I think would have the effect of maintaining the present structure. So there's some rambling thoughts on the preference I have for remuneration for the independent judiciary to be set both practically and visibly by the legislative branch as opposed to the executive branch.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member for the question, and staff and I were paying attention to his remarks and did a little bit of work on this, so I'm grateful for that. So the process as it stands right now is the committee come up with the recommendations, provide them to government. Government receives those recommendations and then waits, if the House is not sitting, has to wait until the House starts to sit. Once the House starts to sit, there are 7 sitting days within which government must table the report. And these are sitting days. These aren't days under the Interpretation Act. This is Ledge has to be sitting. And then after it's tabled, there are 16 further sitting days within which government can either put forward its proposal to replace the recommendations or do nothing and accept them. If the legislature rises before the expiry of those sitting days, then the clock starts again at the next sitting of the Legislative Assembly. And what this means in practice, it sounds like it wouldn't add up to a lot of time. Staff have calculated, they advised me that this results in 150 days, calendar days, on average, between the receipt of the recommendations from the committee and them actually being implemented as a compensation change for judicial justices and provincial court judges. So there is an issue here, a timing issue of 150 days, which is significant, which this is aimed at. Now, with respect to the, pardon me, I was overly optimistic, Mr. Chair, and what I heard from staff through the mask was, I heard 150 days, but staff have corrected me. In fact, it's 250 days on average before the compensation change goes through. Now, with respect to transparency and the issues canvassed during second reading debate, just in terms of bare constitutional requirements, it's our understanding that there's no constitutional requirement that the Legislative Assembly itself be decision maker on JCC recommendations. It's open to a province or territory to grant that authority to the executive or to the legislature at their discretion. And so some provinces have gone one route, some have gone another. Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan has acceptance processes for these committees that do not involve the legislatures. In other words, they're done through executive committee. And it's important to note that this doesn't stop the report from being tabled, that there's still a requirement that the report be tabled. All the OICs are published, including any OIC that would accept the recommendations would be published, so be fully transparent about the decision government had made, that it was a decision of government, whereas currently the report can be tabled and then nothing happens, and that is a deemed acceptance and there's no publication at that stage. And then in addition, it's in a very limited circumstance, which is where government agrees with the recommendations. If government wants to change them in any way, then that would go through the regular process of review through the Legislative Assembly. So it is, as the member acknowledged, a very discrete set of circumstances that would shift this. It's, but potentially one that could save a considerable amount of time and uncertainty around actual compensation for judiciary.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair, and to the attorney. To be clear, I don't think I take issue with the attorney's observation that he is satisfied that the province has the authority and the constitutional authority ultimately to do this, to accept and set remuneration by regulation. I think that's correct. I don't take issue with that, and I guess I'm just advocating a preference. I don't think I've got a lot more on this. I'll ask this, and it might be difficult to imagine this circumstance, but given how litigious this has been in the past, maybe not an entirely impossible scenario. A report is prepared, tabled, government of the day decides that it is prepared to accept all of the recommendations unchanged, issues an OIC to that effect, and for some reason relating to the operation of the independent committee, litigation breaks out. It seems odd, but lots of odd stuff has happened in this world of setting compensation. So we end up with litigation, despite the fact that all the government has done is accept unchanged the recommendations. Any concerns on the attorney's part that what then happens as part of that litigation is an application for access to all of the supporting documentation from the Executive Council that led to the creation of the OIC.
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps one of the reasons why this is was triggered in the member's mind as an important area to canvass is that this exact issue on the 2016 Judicial Compensation Commission was taken all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada by the Provincial Court Judges Association. They were seeking access to the cabinet documents underlying the decision of government around the 2016 JCC, and the Supreme Court of Canada denied that interlocutory application ultimately. So our understanding of the decision is that that is now settled law, that those cabinet documents are not subject to judicial review, that it's the decision itself.
Member.
Right, and I think this is my last kick at this. That decision, though, having been made pursuant to the existing statutory framework, is the attorney at all, and you may not be worried, it may not matter in the attorney's mind, but in a scenario where the format has changed and there is now an OIC process by which that happens, is there a possibility that that decision can be distinguished and a subsequent application, and maybe the attorney is not concerned either way, but does that render the earlier decision a bit moot in a case where we've created a slightly different mechanism here?
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The member may have seen me waving up at the gallery. It's just nice to see we have school groups, looks like, visiting our Legislative Assembly again. It's a pleasure to see you all join us as we That's right. I think particularly exciting for this group, judicial compensation, a new law coming into the province, and that's what we're asking in answering questions about. Welcome to the Assembly. The court's decision on that issue, we think articulated a broad principle, although it was certainly in a specific factual scenario, including the legislation at the time, which we're seeking to change, as well as the specific documents that were being sought by the Provincial Court Judges Association. So certainly I would hesitate to say that this is not something that could be argued, and in fact it likely will be argued, just given the history of these of this process of setting compensation for judiciary. But our feeling is that the broad principle articulated in the Supreme Court of Canada would render that a relatively low risk. You know, well, maybe we'll be revisiting this in 5 years and having a different conversation. So these are challenging areas to predict.
Shall Clause 5 pass? Aye. So ordered. Oh. I'll ask again. Shall Clause 5 pass? Aye. Okay, so on division. All right. Shall Clause 6 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 7 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 8 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 9 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 10 pass? So ordered. Shall the title pass? So ordered. Attorney.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move the committee rise and report the bill complete without amendment.
Members have heard the question. All those in favour, please indicate aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Committee Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Committee reports Bill 30 complete without amendment.
When shall the bill be read a third time, Attorney General?
Now, please, Honourable Speaker.
Members, the question is third reading of the bill number 30, Attorney General Statute Amendment Act 2021. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Bill number 30, Attorney General Statutes Amendment Act 2021 has been read third time and has passed. Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for the support. Call Committee of the Whole Bill 18 Human Rights Code Act.
Committee Chair.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm joined by Colleen Rice, Director of Justice Policy, Policy and Legislation Division, and Melanie Tucker, Senior Policy Analyst, Policy and Legislation Division. We'll be talking about the Human Rights Code, which is the law that protects people in our province from discrimination and racism.
Thank you, Attorney. Shall Clause 1 pass? Member for Kelowna West on Clause 1.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to ask the Minister just about the definition, which is described in Clause 1. It says Indigenous in relation to a person means an Indigenous within the meaning of Indigenous peoples as defined in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And I just would ask for clarification on the rights of Inuit and Métis peoples that are often referred to as Indigenous or as part of that, and how they're going to be considered under the human rights in this particular bill.
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This definition refers back to the Constitution Act, which includes Indigenous, includes First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So by incorporating that definition from the Constitution, Métis people are included in the definition.
Shall Clause 1 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 2, Member for Abbotsford West on Clause 2.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. The House in second reading, I think, articulated and indicated its support, and for a variety of reasons offered by participants in that debate for why this is an appropriate and welcome step to take. I suppose in the committee, though, I feel a certain obligation to pose a couple of questions to the attorney to achieve a perhaps better understanding of what the effect of this will be. And I suppose the obvious question is, can the Attorney General offer the committee an example of discriminatory behavior or practice that would be captured by this new category within the Act of Indigenous identity that wouldn't previously have been captured by one of the other definitions that exist in the existing code.
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on a point of law, staff advised that certainly their understanding and my understanding that Indigenous people were and are protected under the current Human Rights Code under the existing enumerated grounds. With that said, something that Ardith Wacom raised in her report for the Human Rights Tribunal, there were two parts to it. One was that currently Indigenous people have to essentially choose, do I want to allege that I'm being discriminated on the basis of race, or do I want to allege I'm being discriminated on the basis of color? And in those scenarios, Ardith Wacom's report found that Indigenous people don't really see themselves in that way and didn't feel that that adequately reflected what they were experiencing in being discriminated against as an Indigenous person. And so this responds to that concern. It also puts in plain language in the code itself, if someone were reading the code, do I have a right here to go to the tribunal? Oh, I'm Indigenous, Indigenous identity, I'm here, I can go. And trying to reduce that barrier in the statute itself to someone feeling like, oh, I'm not sure if what happened to me fits within those categories. And the reason why that's important is certainly within Ardith Wacom's report, there was a identification of the fact that Indigenous complainants were underrepresented at the tribunal. In other words, the tribunal wasn't hearing from Indigenous people in the way that one would expect, given what Indigenous people deal with in our society still, unfortunately, and with respect to racism and discrimination. And also, she recommended this amendment to us, but also Mary Ellen Trapella-Fawn's report in plain sight in relation to the healthcare system and discrimination, racism faced by Indigenous people in the healthcare system. Also, Mary Ellen Trapella-Fawn recommended to government that we do this as well. And so there are a couple of reasons for putting this forward. The functional legal protections are arguably the same. I say arguably because the substantive, one of the pieces of the law that we hope is that people see themselves and understand themselves as protected. And so that is really what this is aimed at.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. The attorney referred to the report in plain sight, so I'll accept the invitation maybe to use that as a basis for an example for the conversation we'll have here. And I think I understood the attorney to the Attorney General to say that we're an individual, or a group for that matter, identified within that report to have advanced a claim under the Human Rights Code. Today, they would have, the protections would have been there or are there for them. But much of the concern is that in the absence of a specific reference to Indigenous identity, the belief is that there is a reluctance on the part of Indigenous peoples to an Indigenous person to do that, and that's why, in a sense, this represents a bit of an exception insofar as it truly particularizes a particular group. I mean, is that roughly speaking this notion that Indigenous people are underrepresented? And the report has said that. The attorney mentioned it today, and in his second reading remarks. That is the essence of the rationale for doing this, and one I think that the House has embraced and endorsed.
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the short answer to the member's question is yes. The longer answer is this is something that we heard from our Indigenous partners, that this was something that they wanted to see in the code. It's something that we heard from experts that we're looking at and interacting with Indigenous communities that are themselves Indigenous, looking at barriers to Indigenous people accessing the human rights protection system in our province. You know, it's, I almost hesitate to say it's similar, but in the past, government has taken steps to identify a group of people who specifically need to see themselves in the enumerated grounds, who would otherwise have to rely on what's in human rights law called a constellation of factors, or essentially put together a series of different grounds to describe their experience. And that was, the member will, I'm sure, recall the amendment made by the previous government, the BC Liberal government, to include gender identity and expression in the code. Previously, someone who faced discrimination because of gender identity or expression would have had to sort of cobble together a number of different grounds and try to explain why their discrimination was protected. Not immediately intuitive to someone who's looking at the code, who might be facing various forms of marginalization. And so the government at that time felt it necessary to, even though the legal opinions were that this is a group that was protected under the existing language, to put that specifically in there so that that group was able to see themselves in the code and that their rights are protected. And I hesitate to say analogous because the experiences are different, but the legislative issue is the same. Here is Indigenous people who really do need to see themselves and identify a way to access the protections of the code in our province, and their protections against being discriminated against facing racism. And so to give that clarity and to not require Indigenous people to have to identify in some way that they don't really see themselves, instead to give a path for Indigenous people to identify themselves as they see themselves within the code is in fact a human rights approach, and in fact what the code is, the spirit of the code is meant to be, as opposed to a legalistic or a formalistic kind of approach.
Member.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. I don't mean the next question to in any way be a trick question or to try and be mischievous. We've had some conversation about the underrepresentation of Indigenous people in the human rights complaint process. Is the attorney, does he have any sense, or based on the advice he has received from some of the legislative officers and the reports that have, in saying that, does someone have a sense of what the target, and I don't even want to use that term, we want to target a certain number of complaints, but if the attorney understands the essence of my question, if the present participation rate is deemed unnatural or inconsistent with what the perceived experiences are, does he have a sense of what a more appropriate level of participation would be?
Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's no target, perhaps obviously, but I think important to say that on the record. What the issue is that this is aimed at is when Ardith Wacom went out and said and met with Indigenous people and talked about the Human Rights Tribunal and the Human Rights Code. Indigenous people themselves identified their reluctance to go, the barriers that they saw to advancing complaints. And when you see reports like Marilyn Trapello-Fawn's report in plain sight about racism against Indigenous people in the healthcare system, the widespread nature of the issue, the profound concerns Indigenous people have about accessing healthcare as a result, and whether they'll be treated fairly in a hospital environment or in a medicalized environment. These are profound issues for our province. And so the underrepresentation or the reluctance to participate or the barriers that have been in place, there were a number of different recommendations that came out of Ardith Wacom's report to improve Indigenous participation. And we have seen some increase in the willingness of Indigenous people to use that system to bring forward concerns about racism and discrimination, to the point that now I understand 11% of complaints at the tribunal are from people who self-identify as Indigenous people. And our hope is that this is one more piece that will help Indigenous people feel more comfortable accessing the tribunal and its protective abilities around responding to incidents of discrimination and racism.
Member on Clause 2.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Am I correct that following passage of these provisions in Bill 18, that an individual who believes they have been subject to discrimination on the basis of their Indigenous identity will thereafter be in a position to file a complaint on that basis, and that all of the remedies set out in Section 37 of the code will thereafter be available to them in pursuing that complaint?
Attorney.
That is correct.
Member, and we are getting close to the hours.
And any additional remedies that would be relevant to this topic beyond those set out in Section 37?
Attorney.
The answer is no, and noting the hour, I move that. Okay.
Shall Clause 2 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 3 pass? So ordered. Shall the title pass? So ordered. Attorney.
I move the committee rise report the bill complete without amendment.
Members have heard the question. All those in favor indicate aye. Opposed? Carried.
Committee Chair.
Committee reports Bill 18 complete without amendment.
When shall the bill be read a third time, Attorney General?
Now, please, Honourable Speaker.
Members, the question is reading of bill number 18 third time. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Bill number 18 entitled Human Rights Code Amendment Act 2021 has been read third time and has passed. Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Noting.
Committee Chair.
Honourable Speaker, Section A reports progress on Bill 23 and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Attorney General? So ordered. Attorney General.
Move the House adjourn for lunch.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m. today.